Hello and welcome to another episode of Mordred's Community Multiplayer Political Chat, joined by a new co-host this week, Archmill. How's it going?
Hello there. Everything's going well. Thanks for
So,
having me.
pleasure's all mine. Interesting session this past week. As we take a look at the Great Powers, we do have a player at number 1 on the Great Power list, and then players at 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Any surprises here jump out at you?
Um, for the moment, not really. Many of the players that we see on here, are New World players. They can expand quite freely, without any player opposition in the area. I'm kind of surprised Bjarnrik is not on there. But other than that, no real big surprises for me. The fact that Alisna is up there in fourth is interesting to me, and considering that player is looking to move to the New World, um, I'm interested to see how that will shift and if the Phoenix Empire will gobble that all up.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see. I think Alisna being as high as it is quite interesting. They worked well with the Phoenix Empire, and then yeah, as you mentioned, Iraq Prune, Malachnar, and the Greeks being right up there, 5, 7, and 8 is also interesting. I knew they were going to be large, but uh, they're quite dominant so far.
They've outdone themselves for sure.
So as we dive in and start with Malachnar, anything jump out at you? Looks like up to date on tech, doing pretty good from an ideas perspective. As we mentioned, a great power, but limited visibility. Not much they can do besides colonizing at this point. What's next for Malachnar?
I think that the game plan for Malachnar is going to be going into Irqa Prune for the moment. And so, as long as they can keep Irqa Prune isolated, they should have a good go at that. And so that's going to be interesting to see. That may, as you've seen, they colonize already towards the season elves, and so I'm expecting to see some action over there.
And
And
then
then on the other side, um, we have a gnomish hierarchy that wants to go colonial, so they may see some conflict on that end as well.
I I don't see the Gnomish hierarchy getting over there anytime within the next 40 years. There's a decent amount of colonial or uncolonized land to chew up there first before they bump into each other. How quickly do you think we'll see that first conflict between the New Worlders and the uh, colonial nations?
I don't think we'll see it next session already, but who knows? Depending on how rapid the colonial powers expand and what the New World powers are going to do about it, it could already happen next session. Something to be wary of. Eberthill is getting very close to both Arachnoprune and the Greek elves in the Gakaion. So there might be some stirring over there, but who knows?
And as we look at Iraq Prune, once again, similar to Malachnar, pretty much up to date on tech, a little bit behind from an ideas perspective, but their eco is humming. They've got a little more AI to eat to the north of them compared to Malachnar, so some natural expansion. How fast or quickly do you think they're going to move south to contest Eberthill as Eberthill comes into these colonial regions?
I think it depends on if they can get a deal with Malachnar. Malachnar really, also from their mission tree perspective, wants to eat the entire northern Elantir. And so if Arachnoprune can maintain some safety um, with Malachnar and just grow themselves, they can go south pretty fast. But they should be very wary that they're going to be caught between Eberthill on one end and Malachnar on the other.
And then as we shift to our southern Greek friends, once again, another great power, strong eco, a little bit weaker than the two in the north. a little bit behind from a technology perspective, but doing just fine from an ideas perspective. What do you think their plan is with regards to Eberthill? Obviously, Eberthill is right in between the Season Elves and the Greek Elves. How quickly are they going to look to expand northwards, or are they content to eat the AIs directly to their east?
I think Eberthill is going to have issues projecting power, effective power, towards the Greek elves down here. And so the game plan for Degakayon, I think, is just to rush eastwards instead of northwards, and to claim as much of this land before um, other colonial powers settle this land, or a Jaharian exemplars arrives, and they can build their base out of that.
And we'll take a journey westward into Rahen. We have a tag swap here.
Very
Von
strong.
Rahar, extremely strong tag. National ideas, 20% morale of armies. Land leader shock. Shock damage plus 20%. Infantry combat, 15%. Fire damage received, minus 10. Just unbelievable national ideas here.
And then you add the religion and their military on top of that, and you've got a force to be reckoned with.
Are they strong enough to contest the Phoenix Empire is the big question. Or is it just going to be a small pebble in the way of a large giant?
I think the Phoenix Empire, for now, while strong and definitely the strongest, is still a bit of a paper tiger. Um, but yeah, Van Rahar on its own could not stand up to the Phoenix Empire, and so they should probably reach out to of Dalkhanzad and see uh, if they can get an agreement going, if they can help each other out, because that make it very hard for the Phoenix Empire to make a significant incursion into Rahen, and Van Rahar also being part of that Rahen, um, like being a march of that of Denny Jaraj, that could be interesting as well. There's a lot of techs that could come in with their own manpower, specifically, which could make it very difficult for the Elven military of the Phoenix Empire to sustain long conflicts.
Yep. And that is a downside of the Elven military type, that slower manpower recovery speed.
Yeah.
And we'll shift north now. Lake Federation, Vissi's relatively slow expansion. Not super familiar with this region. Is this what you expected coming in? Are we seeing the Lakefed progress into what's I've been told is an extremely strong formable, or is Vissi's in trouble here?
I think Visis is doing phenomenally.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's you don't expand on your own that much as a Lake Fed player, but you have to progress through the mission tree. And if you look, they're quite a ways down already, and
Yeah, extremely far down this mission tree now that I'm taking a look.
and that's what's going to be the big thing. So there's a little ways to go still, but he's making very good time. He's looking very strong. Um, the only thing that's something to consider is their relationship to the ogres in Magharagma. But on its own, Lakefed is looking very strong. Once he finishes the mission tree, he's gonna inherit all of the Federation members, um, and he'll undoubtedly jump to number one great power, and potentially that could we could see that happening next session.
And you mentioned the ogres, Magharagma. Still a few large centaur tribes around them. From rewatching the stream, it did appear like they did well against Wingblade. Um, if you look, they've got some vassals in those
The
centaur
Serpent Spine?
tribes. They've got a few cores of their own. Anything to note with these ogres as we move forward?
I think at this rate, they need to make some diplomatic play with the Lakefed. The ogres can go different ways still. But the Lakefed really has to kind of expand into the ogres to get out. So if Magharagma can secure friendly relations with the Lakefed, that should help them grow. If not, they might be in a hard spot.
And then we'll dive back into the Serpent Spine now. Our good friends, the Cannon Dwarves of Dalkhanzad. Relatively slow expansion so far, I would say. I know they had a late um, reawakening as a remnant dwarf, but starting to get their feet underneath them. Doesn't appear to be any large threats remaining in their section of the Serpent Spine. What do you expect out of them in the next week or two?
For the moment, just slow expansion. And they should be wary of the Phoenix Empire and perhaps also the Wood Elves going into the Serpent Spine. But other than that, they're just there to sit and turtle and hopefully get some diplomatic relations on.
Yeah, Verkal Gulin being a Phoenix Empire vassal, um, along with Greedy Grin. So as they look to expand westwards, they'll definitely have some conflicts brewing. So
That's
that'll be
gonna look
interesting to see.
foreboding for sure.
And then as we transition up into the core of the Serpent Spine, Thieving Arrow was at AI last week, but did a little bit of expansion. Seems to be in an okay spot. But Rail Skulker, uh, largest nation in the Serpent Spine, fought
Looking very dominant.
fought a big war against Shattered Crown, but now has, uh, I'd say, a dominant position in the Serpent Spine. A huge number of holds. Obviously, some are still damaged and need to be repaired, but um, what do you expect out of Rail Skulker?
Um, I think again, Rail Skulker should be very wary about the Wood Elves because the Wood Elves have a vassal inside the Serpent Spine and a claim on Road Warrior, and so um, the Wood Elves being allied to the Phoenix Empire, they might well look to expand into the Serpent Spine, and that might cause a lot of issues for our Rail Skulker player. Um, and so they should see if they can get some agreement going with Thieving Arrow, who's also looking to be in a dangerous position compared to the Wood Elves, and potentially I am expecting to see a death war with between Railskulker and Orlazem Asdir, unless they find a way to band together against the potential Wood Elf incursion into their lands.
And you mentioned the Ram Dwarves, obviously a relatively unique mission tree compared to a lot of the other a lot of the other dwarves. Quite a bit of expansion outside of the Serpent Spine for them in that mission tree puts them
Mm-hmm.
butting heads with Frozen Maw, who's probably one of the stronger AIs left at this point. Um, should the Ram Dwarves be a little bit wary about how quickly they're expanding outside the Serpent Spine, or do they need to continue to expand as quickly as possible just to contest the potential threat from the goblins?
I think they should indeed look to expand quickly and potentially, if they can, strike a deal with Bjarnrik. They're not in much competition with each other. They could take down Frozenmaw together, uh, and potentially Bjarnrik could offer some security for Olazamazir. In a similar fashion, perhaps Magharagma can't. Uh, but otherwise, they look to be very isolated over there, which may be a problem for them.
And then we'll shift into Eskin now. We've got two major players, Adenica and Marhold, and then obviously Kavaria made some incursions into the area, and the Wood Elves appear to be moving in as well, if just a very small foothold.
Mm-hmm.
How soon is this area going to be consolidated, and how quickly are the player wars going to start popping up in this area? As you know, last season was quite the hotbed for player conflict.
And it depends, but it could likely will be a hotbed as well. Relations between Adenica and Marhold are good, But that could change once the religious reformation, once the Coronites spawn. That could change things up in a big way. Uh, they have to do some diplomatic maneuvers. Danica and Marhold don't have a lot of conflict in their mission trees, and they could very well split Ascan in half between the two of them. But Corvuria and the Wood Elves represent a unique challenge because they both would like uh, to get hold of all of Ascan, and the Wood Elves and the Phoenix Empire will also likely want to move into Corvuria at some point. So either this could be resolved diplomatically, which would probably entail Corvuria going out of Eskin, but otherwise, this could be a hotbed for violence from next session until the end of the game.
Yep, makes sense.
But then
And
again, it also depends on Coronite. Who's going to go Coronite? Who's going to stay Regent Court?
you mentioned Adenica and Marhold, relatively good relations. I believe there was a small war between Adenica and Arboran. How do relations stand now between Adenica and the northern members of the Empire?
For the moment, they're good. Um, Adenica has no interest from their mission tree, but also from a geopolitical perspective to go west. Arboran wants to go east in their mission tree, but Arboran may have different things to be worried about. And so this is very much an alliance of convenience. And as long as it stays convenient, which could be for a very long time, uh, that could be a solid alliance, especially as Bjarnrik is looming from the north and the Phoenix Empire is looming from the south, and the Emperor of Anbennar being the way that they're playing. That could last for a long time.
And you mentioned Bjarnrik, obviously the large player in the north here, sitting decently off the great power list at only about 500 dev, and then their neighbor to the direct south, the Gnomish hierarchy, just behind them at about 400 dev. Is there enough AI to be eaten with Gaved and Frozen Maw that the gnomes and Bjarnrik will be peaceful next session, or is this another potential area for some blue flames?
I think next session it's probably going to stay peaceful between the two of them. I really like the diplomatic play of Bjarnrik in this instance, but I don't rate it from the gnomish side. Uh, Bjarnrik can now fully focus on Frozemaw, Gawed, and the small tags in that area as well. While the gnomish hierarchy may feel safe for a while, but eventually Bjarnrik will come down there. Uh, so this has bought the gnomes some temporary safety, which I think will last till next session, but that might end sooner rather than later.
And then we continue south. We have what is no other way to say it, but the richest nation in the game for its weight class, the small country.
Phenomenal.
Unbelievable income currently,
Yeah.
over 100 ducats a month, 70 plus of that coming from trade. Um, Very strong game out of them so far. What do you expect for our halfling fellows moving forward?
I think they are the kingmaker of this MP at this stage of the game. Um, they can very well keep good relations with the gnomes, with Arboran, without too much conflict. The only conflict I potentially see arising is with Rubinair and potentially Ambercost as they want to capture more of the trade. But other than that, they can simply just sit there, economize, and throw their full financial weight behind someone of their choosing and influence the game that way.
And then you mentioned Abencost, then we have Conwell and Gaberd as our uh, middle Imperials, I guess we could call them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Strong game from Conwell, considering where they were. I believe they started the session fully occupied, and maybe we're fully occupied again at a different war.
Yeah.
Abencost continues its expansion. Strong eco there, extremely good technology. And then Geberd continued an expansion. Obviously starts as an OPM, but is becoming a decent-sized imperial power in their own right. Anything jump out at you between these three nations are middle imperials?
Um, yeah, one thing in particular that Conwell and Gibbert are going to have a lot of conflict going forward. And Conwell finds itself in a bit of a precarious position in that regard. They are allied to Vern and Amacost, but I'm not sure they may be able to offer enough help if Jaberd and Arboran, potentially even the small country, come knocking. And so they need to be very careful of how they're going to solve this diplomatically.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot for them. We can see Gibbard or Gibbard or however we want to
Mm-hmm.
say this nation already has claims on a decent chunk of Conwell. So I do believe that is a major source of internal conflict within the Empire moving forward.
Indeed.
And then we'll touch on the Emperor and what we'll call the outer Imperials, Rubenair and Eberthill. Eberthill continues a dominating game. As we mentioned before, they're up there on that great power list, sitting at number 3. Colonial expansion going well. Vern also expanding well colonially. Extremely strong military. Huge amount of manpower. It doesn't have the eco to necessarily support it, but as you mentioned, if they can keep relations with small country up, expect Vern to continue to be a powerhouse. And then Rubenair, uh, new Laurent maybe at some point.
Looking like it.
It's starting to grow a little bit, but as we take a look at the coalition map mode, extremely limited in current expansion options. So that'll be interesting moving forward. Anything to note between our Emperor and the outer Imperials?
I think the diplomatic posturing that Vern has done up this game so far, which has been very divisive inside the Empire, may come back to haunt them. Uh, Rubenair has some conflict with the small country, and I think Rubenair could very well solve that diplomatically with the small country. But yeah, that could come back to haunt them, and we might see a Southern Imperials versus Northern Imperials going forward if they're not careful. Also, Anbennar, I believe, currently is allied to. Oh no, they're not allied to Vern, but Anbennar might want to do something about Vern as well. Vern is keeping a lot of the trade value, um, and Amicos clearly wants that from themselves. Similarly, Rubenair is currently allied to Vern, but has some claims going into that direction. And so, while Vern is looking stable and in a good position right now, they should be very wary of the developments that may take place that may cause their allies to reconsider their value as an ally. The only exception to that would be Eberthill. Eberthill and Vern, I think, are going to be friends for life. That's going to bolster their colonial expansion as well.
And then, as we zoom out, take a look at the overall picture. What region do you expect to have the most player-driven conflict next session?
I think it highly depends on the Coronite spawning, and that could be a source for a lot of conflict. Otherwise, likely around Eskin, uh, between Adenica, Kavaria, Marhold. If they can solve it diplomatically, then it may not be between those players per se, but potentially those players versus a Vedux Empire and Seranvar.
Yeah,
Other area of conflict? Oh, sorry, continue.
no, I'd agree. I think the Wood Elves obviously expanded quite well. They've consumed most of their claims. There's not a ton of AI left for them to eat. Um, I'd expect the Eskin region to be driving a lot of the player conflict in the near future here.
Yeah, for sure. The other area could be the Empire, for sure. Jabred and Conwell, I think that could be a conflict and also proxied perhaps by Arboran and Small Country on the Gibert side, and Vern and Amakos on the other side, that could be a long conflict in the making.
I do agree. I don't think we'll see that next session. Just there's still some AIs to be eaten and aggressive expansion to be wary of at this point in the game. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah, that's true.
I may have a different point of view the next time we do one of these videos, but right now I think Eskin is more likely, just because of the X factor that the Wood Elves are going to bring.
I agree.
And then as we take a look at the income of various nations, obviously Phoenix Empire, small country, the Greeks, Irqa Prune, the Wood Elves, all up there, generating quite a large amount of ducats. Who has potential to join that top tier from an economic perspective? That's just 1 or 2 sessions away from moving up that list.
Definitely, Arboran could well become one of the top income nations. I also think Rubenair could be situated to do so. They're quite a ways off right now, but the area could get very valuable in the short term.
Yeah, I'm also interested to see what comes out of Rahen. Having played Jadari last season, there's tremendous value from a trade perspective and fantastic trade goods all throughout
sure.
that area. And then if Vises is able to unify the Lakefed, I believe there's a
Right.
decent amount of income there as well.
Yeah, for sure. I completely forgot about the Lakefed. If Aziz unifies the Lakefed, that will definitely be a top player from a financial point of view.
And then as we look at the current military position of the various nations, we've got Vern in the Wood Elves, over 100,000 manpower. The New Worlders in Arboran not far behind. Who do you think in this second tier, outside the New Worlders, will be breaking that 100k mark next session? We've got Arboran, the Ogres,
Arboran.
Small Country, Eberthill.
I think multiple of them. Arboran looks very well positioned to do so. Um, Bjarnrik depends on how quickly they can consolidate much of Frozenmall and uh, how they can develop and the buildings in their land. Um, Eberthill, I'm unsure, seeing they're playing the colonial game. But again, if they can develop their holdings in Canor and in Sahel, um, they could potentially get there as well.
And then we'll circle back where we started, that great power list. Alizna likely to fall off a bit due to the Jaharan Exemplar event and the players' desire to move that direction. The command is in a bit of a pickle right now. What
Not gonna
player
move on
could
for
you
this
see
world.
joining this list as Alizna and the command move off a bit?
I think, well, if the Lakefed forms, the Lakefed 100%, they will likely be catapulted to the first or second place. Um, I could see Bjarnrik if they manage to take down Frozenmall effectively, they could get there. Uh, Also potentially Vern or the small country. Again, depending on how well they expand, they could get there.
And then, is there anyone on this list, any player that maybe already hit their ceiling, is running out of expansion options, or is in a precarious spot diplomatically that you could see tumbling off this list next week?
Next week, I'm not sure, but Irqa Prune. They still have some consolidation to do. That is true, but Malachnar is looming over in the east, and so I do see them hitting a little bit of a ceiling potentially.
From a New World perspective, I'd agree. I think Eberthill might actually be in one of the more precarious spots. Um,
How so?
I think that they may be having to fight two front wars. If
Mm.
Iraq Prune and Malachnar can come to an agreement, Eberthill's New World holdings may be threatened. And then from an expansion perspective, they don't have a ton of space to go into without butting up against the Phoenix Empire.
Yeah. No, that's very true. And also they have some holdings here and there. For instance, Nathalar, which may drive Corvuria and its allies to come after them as well. So I rate what you say as well. They might find themselves a little bit thinly spread out and attacked from multiple angles, which could hamper them. But then again, there's still so much land to colonize, and that will attribute at least to their great power score. If it will benefit them long term, that's to be remains to be seen.
Well, Archmill, appreciate you joining us, and I'm looking forward to what Adenica is going to bring us next session and in the sessions to come.
Thank you for having me once again.